FutureCon has been an amazing resource for an early stage startup like Track. It's affordable, we get amazing leads, it's an amazing group of people, they really care about the vendors, they really care about the attendees, and overall it's just been a fantastic way for an early stage startup to grow our business.
This is my first FutureCon and I'm so grateful to be here. This is one of the best conferences that I've had the opportunity to attend lately. From the energy, from the people, from being able to connect with other security professionals in the field and learn from each other, it has been an incredible experience. I also love hearing from all the different security companies and learning what's out there on the market. And I'm really grateful to have had this experience, and hopefully we'll be back next year.
Applause for all of our sponsors. Thank you, thank you. This is, as the CEO of FutureCon, this is our wrap-up event of the year. We wrapped up with 30 events this year, and there's no way we could do it without our sponsors. And we couldn't do it without our turnout of our attendees. So a round of applause for all of our attendees that came today and made it. We have about a ton of virtual people today, and they're tuned in right now. There was probably 200 virtual people. There was a lot of emails I got with a lot of companies that were having technical issues today, so our well wishes to them. Seems like right at the holidays is when everyone has the most problems, so I wish them well. But let's go ahead and start with Nick Waldman. He's the VP of Cybersecurity from Max Credit Union, and we appreciate him coming all the way from Alabama. And thank you, Nick. Congratulations. Jennifer Rayford is the CISO of GlobeSec Advisory. So Jennifer, congratulations. Ezra Flom is the GRC director from Scribe America. Ezra, are you here still? I don't think so. Christy Kurtowski is the CISO for First Key Homes. Chris Kortiski for First Key Homes. See, some of these people are so important they can't stay all day. Brent Hamilton is the CISO for Valid FI. Thank you. Blake Penn is the CISO at Colgate University. Congratulations. Okay, we have Tamika Bass as the cybersecurity director from Gannett, Fleming. Thank you, Tamika. And we have Louise Valenzuela as the Director of Data Governance, Data Loss Prevention at InComm Payments, and one of our panelists today, Marc Johnson, who's been traveling all over the country to sit on our panels today. He's the CISO of Impact Advisors. Thank you, Marc. Thank you for all you did this year. Tera Ladner is the VP Information Risk Management and Governance at Aflac. Everyone knows Aflac. Thank you, Tera. And last but not least, our moderator, who we all know, Ken Foster, cybersecurity expert in the industry, and he will be moderating the panel. So everyone, remember, if you have any questions, wait for someone on my team to bring the mic up to you. I have 2 seats right here if anyone from the back wants to come up, because we will add some more chairs once I fill up all the chairs. But I'll go ahead, and it's all yours, Ken.
All right. Can everybody hear me? There we go. Whoa, that's loud. Yeah. I appreciate everybody sticking around and staying here so we can have the...
Let me
Okay.
control the noise.
Okay.
Okay, everyone, I don't want to be on camera for this. I'm going to politely ask everyone, if you're having conversations, can you please take them out into the foyer, because we're streaming to about 200 people and the background noise does pick up. And I don't think anyone is listening to me because nothing has changed. So once again, can I kindly, politely as I can, ask everyone to take your conversations out into the hallway, please, so we can make sure our virtual audience is listening. Okay, I'll turn it back over to Ken.
All right. Or I can be really loud and start yelling at people and throwing water bottles. Boy, that got quiet, didn't it? Well, so thank everybody for sticking around. Thank you guys for being here to listen to the panel. We've got a great group here with us this afternoon to talk about what's going on in the cybersecurity world today, right? So I think the first thing we're going to start here is I'm going to let each one of you give just a quick, brief introduction of yourself. And Luis, we're going to start with you and one on down the panel. So keep it to 30 seconds.
Check. Luis Valenzuela. I've been in IT for a couple of decades, initially with satellite communications in government and defense. For the last decade, more in cybersecurity. I'm responsible for data governance, data protection, data loss prevention at InComm Payments. And at InComm Payments, we do gift cards, health benefit cards, payment processing. And it is a pleasure to be here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tera Ladner. I work for Aflac. I am a global lead and vice president of information management and governance. And what that means is, if you think about security in terms of kind of operations and GRC, I'm responsible for all the governance functions, third-party risk management, security awareness, those kinds of things.
Good afternoon. Tamika Bass. I am the cybersecurity director for a company called Gannett, Fleming. We operate in the civil engineering space. I've been in the role about almost 4 years now. Prior to that, I was a CISO for the state of Georgia, 2 state agencies, and I'm pretty much responsible for all things cybersecurity in my role. So happy to be here.
Marc Johnson, been in the industry for a few decades. So from that perspective, it's been interesting to watch how things have evolved over time, from the semantic antivirus on to other things that I worked with specifically, but now I'm with Impact Advisors, and I serve many of our healthcare customers regularly as a vCISO and so forth. So that's me.
All right, and I'm Ken. I'm just Ken. So good to see everybody. I'm glad everybody stuck around for this. So for the panel here, so 2024, we're coming down to the end of it. It's been an interesting year, especially in the cybersecurity world. I think we've seen a lot of things coming out. So what do you guys think are some of the most significant emerging cybersecurity threats that we're seeing coming down the pipe right now? Luis, we'll start on this end again and work our way down.
Although most people might say AI or advanced threats from big countries, I personally see the SaaS applications and all of the corporate data being hosted in SaaS applications as one of the highest risks, just because nobody thinks about them as high risk. And when it comes to the development of AI in the way the attackers use it, most of our modern tools, like, I don't want to say what tools, but most of our EDR type tools or SIEMs, they are kind of working on that in the defense. So most of that risk is pretty much covered by those contracts that we have with them. On the other hand, where 20 years ago, most of the corporate applications were hosted within our security perimeter, like HR, finance, all of those things were within our firewalls, and therefore we had controls of their the users, we had reviews for the access. Today, most of those applications are SaaS applications. So the cybersecurity teams and the SOC, don't have the same visibility that we have for our production systems. It's not like a user is having some anomaly, abnormal use of their Salesforce, the SOC is going to see it because they're not connected. So because of that, because of the prevalence of sensitive data, especially in SaaS applications, I personally see that as one of the top risks right now, along with APIs.
Sure. So I'm going to say the highest risk that we've identified over the last several years is our supply chain risk. While we do a very good job of assessing our first parties, it comes down to our third parties. It comes down to our fourth and fifth parties where we end up finding either a breach or an impact to our operations. And so we've done a lot this year, over the last year, to try to build out kind of our continuous monitoring, identifying those fourth, fifth parties so that we are aware as soon as possible, but it still doesn't give me the right to go in and assess those programs. And even if I did, that seems to be where the bad guys are attacking these days, or at those levels. So at any given time, we're working 15 privacy incidents or security incidents that we're finding from fourth and fifth parties. So I'm going to identify that one.
So you both stole my answers. No, I would say third-party risk. To kind of piggyback off of what Louis said. Really, those SaaS providers that we have, not really knowing, what controls they have in place, and making sure we're doing our due diligence to assess those or those SaaS applications. And I would add on to that cloud security, because I think people are not really thinking about cloud security because they're so focused on AI, they're so focused on ransomware, and just the general endpoints, right? They're not thinking about the fact that most of us have moved most of our stuff, from being on-prem to the cloud. And we think there's this myth that the cloud is secure, right? But we're not doing our due diligence around cloud security. So I would say cloud security is one of those emerging threats that we really have to pay attention to.
So I'll kind of reiterate a couple of them. APIs, I think, are one of the biggest emerging threats because we have too many APIs, number one, that are incorrectly coded. Number two, they return data even when they're not given the proper input, when they shouldn't be giving any return whatsoever, right? So from an overall perspective, that's something we haven't seen as prevalent, but I think it's coming, right? That being said, we also have the misnomer that we've got to put up the perimeter and have the castle walls and nobody's going to breach it. Well, it's not if, it's when. So what are we doing about it? How are we going to respond to it? So from an emerging perspective, I think that's kind of the next wave. You look at Change Healthcare, right? How did they respond? And it wasn't just the fact that Change Healthcare went down, it's that other businesses, other hospital systems had a single point of failure at Change Healthcare.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So whoever we would talk about AI within the first conversation we had on their bingo card, it's winner, there we go. But you guys all brought up a great point, right, as we're talking about these emerging threats and coming out here. Cloud's a big part of this and a lot of people moving to that. I want to dial down a little bit on the incident response here because we're talking about, if you've looked at the breach report from IBM this year and read through it, the cost of breaches went up drastically, but one of the big components that added to that price increase is revenue impact. And I think Change Healthcare is a good example of not only third-party risk, but also the revenue impact. So how is it that you guys are thinking about this more strategically from an incident response, from a cloud security, from your overall strategic approach to how that's so important to understand where all that risk is coming from as you're looking across the board of this impact to revenue that is now being recognized in the breach report, right? Because that was the most significant price increase in the cost of a breach this year.
So I think it's foundational in the first element that the business has to understand what their critical functions are. And there's all too often this misnomer that, oh, business impact analysis, IT can do it. It's not up to IT, because all too often we in IT make some assumptions, and we make those assumptions based upon who screams the loudest. You know, is email really that important to communicate? Maybe. Do you need history? No, right? But from a real business perspective, I can't protect it in the DR plan, and I can't respond to it in the incident response plan if I don't know that it's a priority to begin with.
Yeah. So I'm going to just ask another quick question for you guys to kind of piggyback off that, because I would say email history is important if you're in a regulated environment where they're using email to do certain things from a financial standpoint, especially if you're in a global company and dealing with, say, moving money across borders, and some of that email history becomes a critical component of it, right? So how many of you in the room, I want to see a raise of hands, how many of you are involved with doing business impact analysis or trying to understand that? Who has responsibility for that? That is a lot less people in this room than I expected. So, Tamika, you got anything you'd like to add on that?
I would just say one of the things that we have to pay attention to as it relates to incident response is making sure that our incident response teams know that they're a part of the incident response teams, right? And training them on the incident response plans. I think we have these incident response plans because it's a check the box and we have to have them. But we also need to make sure that we're educating those individuals that are a part of that CERT team, that CCERT team, as well as exercising those plans at least once a year, so that we're not screaming and running around like chickens with our heads cut off when there is an incident. We're prepared to respond.
Tara?
Yeah, I think when it comes to incidents, I mean, our mission statement kind of says, let's avoid all incidents. If they happen, let's respond and recover quickly. That's pretty simple. That's kind of our simple mission. I think it's important that we think carefully about the partners we engage. I'll share a story. I think it's okay to share. I'll ask for forgiveness later. CrowdStrike caught a ton of heck this year. I'm sure CrowdStrike is ready for 2024 to be over. But we may have hired, a nation-state employee. And it took one day for CrowdStrike to reach out to us and say, something's not right with this person. And we looked, and they were downloading KVM, and they had changed their direct deposit information on day one, and we said, doesn't look good, and cut access right then. Now, while, it really impacted ultimately HR processes and how we're going to tighten up those verification of identification and making sure the person that we interview is the person that we hire and a real person. It takes a good partner and the right layered defenses, I think, to be able to identify an incident quickly enough so that we can put our response plan in place and make sure that we bring in the other components of the business that have impact to, those cyber incidents.
I would add to that when we think about people, process, technology, I personally think that we have good technologies, plenty of vendors for a lot of solutions that cover most of what we need from a technical standpoint. We have good people, trained overall. I think where we often fail is in the process part. And to the incident response case, as in many other changes that you make, I think we missed on validating steps and putting them into automation, or if not automation, at least based on Outlook calendar or something, to make sure that certain steps are repeated. By that I mean not necessarily a tabletop exercise every 6 months, like more than 1 year, but at least a simple version that verifies the steps so everybody knows almost automatically what the steps are, who we contact, and verification of those steps, like do we have the right cell phone number? Because people change phone numbers, or somebody moved outside of the department, and have some sort of process that fairly often verifies that all of the steps are in place, that we have the right process, so that when the incident happens, we just go through the handbook and we know it's been tested at least 60 days ago. So I think improving the processes will enhance the usability of the people and the technology that we have in place.
All right, you guys have all hit on something that I think I got another question for the crowd for a show of hands. How many of you think DR and BCP are the same thing? And nobody's going to raise their hand, but I've heard this way too much, right? So I think all of us are talking about business continuity and resiliency overarching, but we're also bringing in the security awareness training, and we're also bringing in communication and collaboration. So how are you guys going about making sure that you're sitting down with all these stakeholders? Because we're talking about testing an incident response plan. Incident response plans are not just the cybersecurity team, not just the IT team. You know, bring up a good point. It's HR, it's communications, it's legal, it's the executive team. And, you know, you should be doing your minimum annual testing of that plan that has everybody involved in that, all the stakeholders. So how are you guys going about in establishing your strategic overview of cybersecurity and how it fits with the business and how it rolls into the awareness training, the communication, the collaboration with all these stakeholders? Because cybersecurity is a team sport, right? We're all involved with this. Everybody in the company should be involved with this. How are you guys facilitating, making sure everybody is clearly aware of what you're trying to accomplish from a risk standpoint, from a regulatory standpoint, from just a best practices standpoint to build a more resilient cyber program? Marc, you want to start us off?
So I think it's important to understand that the highest level you can get to is the board of directors. And you should be in front of that board of directors on a fairly regular basis so that communication not only goes to your executive team, but then to the board that holds them accountable, right? We recognize and we identify the risk and then prioritize for them how we should address that. But from an overall perspective, we have to make sure that in fact they understand the fiduciary responsibility of that and how we're going to address that risk over time.
If you were in my keynote today, you heard me talk about our security committee structure. And we do have various levels of security committees, but ultimately, you know, we don't let anyone accept cyber risk. The business can't say, I accept this risk. That's not the way it works. And our CISO doesn't accept the risk. It goes to a committee, which is a cross-functional committee of all of those various stakeholders we've mentioned, including the business, including IT, including legal, to make those decisions. And so I think, you know, quarterly meetings at the US level, at the global level, including Japan in those, so that we can make not only decisions as a group of people, but also updates, approval of policies, approval of standards, all the things that are foundational to the program are shared. We don't make those decisions in a silo. So everybody is bought in, not only bought in, everybody's stamp of approval is on it, so that, you know, it's not like, well, Tim Callahan said we should be able to do this. Nope, the committee said we should be able to do this, and we are okay with making this decision.
And we have a similar committee that it's our cybersecurity working group that we meet with once a month that is cross-functional. But I use every opportunity to communicate and collaborate, right? So it's kind of hard when you're in an organization that has a lot going on and cybersecurity communication is not a priority because we need to talk about integration and we need to talk about some other things that we have going on. So then you have to get very creative in terms of how do you communicate, you know, with those individual stakeholders. So I use that cybersecurity working group. I also use our incident response tabletops, right? Because we have people from HR, we have people from legal on that team. I sit on the insider threat committee, so I use that as an opportunity to communicate about how we need to collaborate. So just kind of getting creative. And whenever I'm in a room where I can talk to people in the organization that are outside of cyber or outside of IT, just having those conversations and kind of bringing it up, like how important cyber is and how we all have to work together and collaborate. So sometimes it's not as easy as going to the board, especially if there's a lot going on, like mergers, acquisitions, and look, we're focusing on that. We're not focusing on cyber. So in those situations, you have to get creative and figure out other ways to kind of reach the masses.
Luis, you got anything to add? No. Okay. So I think you guys all brought up a thing, that another question for the crowd. Let's see a show of hands. How many of you are at least either in front of the board presenting or at least feel you have an unfiltered communication path to the board? Because I will say that's a couple of things that I like to make sure people are aware. You're not always going to have the opportunity, even at a giant enterprise. You may be 3 levels down from the board and you're going to have, but how many, that is important that your message, you feel your message is getting through unfiltered, right? So I think you guys have all brought up some great strategic overview and great thought about this. So how important is, because rarely is the security team responsible for actual implementation of the tool or the change or the control to actually move your program forward. How important is it to make sure, and how are you going about getting these engineering teams, sometimes architecture teams, to understand, A, how you're going to implement what you need implemented and how you're going to govern it? Because a lot of you guys are in the governance and the risk side of this. So how are you explaining to them and making it transparent so they understand how you're going to measure them and govern them going forward and make sure that what you're rolling out is actually effective? So Luis?
Yes, some of the tools that the cybersecurity team manage in our organization, we implement them. Some are implemented by IT or other groups. But to answer your question, something that we have found useful is using risk quantification to convey the priority, the importance of the activity we are asking collaboration for. So, for instance, we are deploying a tool that will address a particular risk. We don't just limit the request to, can you do X on this change ticket or a ServiceNow request? Because often the answer is, go to the queue, 200 tickets waiting, right? We have found useful to instead address, okay, we need to implement this, which is going to address, for the sake of argument, a database that has X thousand of PHI records, which, by the way, if we don't remediate this, there's a risk of $5 million within the 90th percentile if we were hit, right? And you don't have to even get too detailed if you're familiar with risk quantification. You don't need to get detailed, but just the idea that an infrastructure manager is being told there's a $5 million risk here, and all you need to do is to give us 10 minutes of your time to address this, or potentially if we got hit with that, your name might come up in the report. Psychologically speaking, it's very simple to say, okay, we can make time for that, right? But for that, you have to have the right numbers and use the right truth, priority, and quantification. So we have found that very useful to put a dollar amount to the risk that we are remediating, and that helps to move the ball either with the practitioners within the IT or even the leadership that sometimes may have other priorities in mind. That will make it a priority that everybody agrees on for the company.
Okay. Tara?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's similar. As I spoke about our committees, we have a pretty strong exception and acceptance program in place. If you can't meet a security standard in 30 days, then you have to come to committee and ask for an exception. And those exceptions have to have a remediation plan, and they have to have a time for remediation. Now, sometimes we do end up with a lot of them, and to help our IT partners understand, okay, if you have $5 to spend, where do we want you to spend it, knowing that you don't have $50 to spend, we'll do a heat map of the highest risks, and we'll show them, you know, kind of what's falling in that upper area where they need to address that first. And I think that, you know, to pretend like there aren't things in your organization that can't get done or shouldn't get done or can't be prioritized or can't be paid for, it can't be done in the time you want to is a pipe dream. So what, for me, in the governance role, what I say to everyone is, it's not my call what we prioritize. I can advise you on what we prioritize. What is my call is that I want it all written down. Because the last thing I want is an auditor or regulator to come in and say, ha-ha. And I'm gonna say, nope, we know all about that. It is a risk exception. We have a remediation plan. We know when it's gonna be resolved. You have not caught us red-handed. All is good. So, you know, I think that first of all, taking advantage of an exception and acceptance process is important. But second of all, making sure that you educate your partners in that it's not you know, I'm not coming around with my red pen or my ruler to slap you on the hand. I just want to document it. All we need to be is transparent, have the documentation in place, and that is what protects us.
Yeah, and I guess I would agree. And I don't want to say the same thing you said, but it's all around risk management, right? And again, educating individuals on risk. So I take a risk-based approach to everything. And what I find is when you just have those general conversations with people, it typically falls on deaf ears. But when you say, I'm going to document this as a risk, right? And, you know, your leadership has to accept that risk. Or when you go directly to leadership and say, hey, there's a risk here, and, you know, I'm gonna document it as a risk, you know, but you would need to accept it. They typically say, no, we're not accepting that risk, especially when you've been through a cyber attack. So you really understand the ramifications of another one. So, you know, using a risk-based approach, making sure that when your partners just flat out will not do what it is that needs to be done to implement a control, documenting that risk, right? Requesting a remediation, but making sure that those individuals accept that risk, it totally changes their response to things.
I would definitely agree with everything that's been said as far as having a committee with all the stakeholders involved, et cetera. More tactically, though, I think there needs to be a liaison between the CISO and whoever's executing it, whether it's the CTO, the CIO, whomever. There has to be a liaison that has a foot in both doors, right? Because you can't take the program and beat IT over the head with it. You've got to partner with them, right? As much as we'd love to, yeah. We have to partner.
So this brings up another question, and for the crowd. How many of you are either heavily involved with internal audit or responsible for it, or is it completely outside of your thing, or do you avoid them like the plague because you're afraid they're going to find something and bring it to attention? So the funny thing is, right, is I think that you all brought up a great point, is that is the function of that internal audit team, or even an external assessment, whatever you're bringing in. The goal is to partner with them to help you uncover these issues that you can put together a plan about to address that. So we'll take our first question break of the day, because we've spilled out a lot of information, and I would love for the crowd to ask any questions that they got. And so raise your hand, they'll bring you a microphone, but I'd love to hear any questions from the crowd on stuff that we've covered to this point before we delve into any more conversation.
So while you're waiting for those questions,
yeah.
I just wanted to bring something up that I found, that another area that I'm using to expose risk is third-party client questionnaires that I get.
Yeah.
Right? So do you guys do this? No, we do not. And so when it affects the bottom line, then you say, we have to remediate this, it gets remediated.
Yeah.
So.
Questions?
Yeah, so I have a question.
Okay.
You've touched on incident response as well as business continuity. It's said that there's a tension between protect and pursue, protecting corporation by getting your systems up and running as quick as possible, but potentially at the loss of forensics evidence that you might need to pursue a legal case. Do you see that as a valid tension? And if so, how do you handle the risk between the two?
Okay.
I would say it's a valid tension in the sense that it exists, it's real. However, I think it depends on the organization, how they grade the risk, because it's ultimately a business decision, it's dollars. Is the company going to lose more money in revenue for X amount of time that they're down, or they're going to potentially lose more money in legal fees and processes? And they will have, and I think from a cybersecurity practitioner standpoint, either way is fine, because cybersecurity is not the number one risk for an organization. Cybersecurity is just one of 4 or 5 classes, whether it changes from a private company or a public company, but generally speaking, it's the same. You're dealing with financial risk, credit risk, et cetera, et cetera. Cybersecurity is just one of those. So depending on the business and how the revenue framework works, for some companies, it might make more sense to take the legal chance and go back to have their site up or whatever brings them revenue. For other companies, it might pay out to be out of business for a few hours, days. I think it depends on the company, but both can be valid because it's a business-driven risk decision.
So I won't take a different approach, but I will say resiliency is always that tension between being secure and being up and available. And I mentioned it earlier. Sometimes that means some systems are not up entirely, but they're available for what is needed at the time. When you think about forensics in general, that's a part of your incident response plan. You capture the forensics before you move on. Just like you need to have a scribe to be there to record what you're doing, when you're doing it, how you're doing it, so that you don't have to go back and try to remember and document and so forth. You're already in the heat of the moment. Let somebody scribe for you, but that's a part of the incident response plan.
So I will bring up one thing on that aspect of it, though. How many of you guys are making sure that as part of your resiliency plan, you are having that discussion, right? Because this is a very important piece to me is when I'm talking about resiliency and the cost of that, you brought up a great point, Luis. There's multiple ways to measure risk within a business, but the truth is that's all a component of what business resiliency is. So how are you explaining how the cyber piece of it is going to impact the operational piece of it with the revenue tied to it? So we're going back to this question of, I have this much revenue. If this is no longer running, how long is it going to take me to recover from it? Whether it's a cyber incident, a building fire, a car hitting a telephone pole in the parking lot that took out the internet. How am I explaining that risk in a way, and you guys are all talking about very mature risk programs, by the way. I would posit to say that there's a lot of people in this room who do not have that mature of a risk program. So how are you going about helping people develop these when you come into a company that may not have as mature? How did you start putting a program around maturing an actual risk program, I guess is the best way to ask that.
I would suggest that almost any company can put together a basic outlook of risk for many events. If you look at the CrowdStrike breach report, the IBM breach report, the Verizon, the DBIR, the IRIS, which is free, and even if you talk to your cyber insurance companies, you can get a composite. They all have, well, the public reports, they're there. You just need to read them, and you extrapolate what the numbers are for your organization. So usually they put, the average cost of a breach was. And then you have for companies between $1 million and $10 million, then to $1 billion, $50 billion, find where your organization is in that range. Then find your organization in the what kind of industry, because they always break them down: defense, finance, etc. So I pick financial services. That's what we are. Of this size, that's what we are. So when you select your or you put your organization in all of those grids, each of those is going to give you the statistical historical data of breaches, how much they cost and how often they happen. And when you combine all of those factors, then you can come to an approximation of, for your particular industry in your geographical area, number of employees, all of those factors, there's a, let's say, 20% chances that you will get ransomware in the next 5 years, right? With that, you associate it to your revenue or your uptime or whatever is the dollar value, and now you have a number to start. So it is said that, for instance, they said the average cost of a breach is whatever number you see, $5 million. But when you look at the breakdown, it's more expensive for small business. In fact, it can take a small business out of business, right? So you look at that number. If you know that, statistically speaking, for your organization, one breach can cost you $100,000, let's say. Now you have a number to compare. If we delete, we lose, if we take this step, what's going to be more expensive? Now, it's not guaranteed, but if that's the kind of numbers and calculations cyber insurance is going to be assigned to you and how much you pay for premium, why not to use the same math and the same data for you to make your data analysis, which in turn, you can go back to the cyber insurance company and say, you put me in this category, but we put this money or these tools, and we are expected to decrease by 80%, 50%, decrease my premium. And from what I hear, cyber insurance companies will decrease it if you can prove that. So I think it sounds complex, but most of that data is available out there, and it can be refined for sure, but that's how I would approach how to mix and determine the likelihood and the cost of certain risk against the decisions you make.
So I'll go on top of that to say, you mature a program by understanding the gaps. So that's the first thing, right? Understand what you're trying to attain. Now, in a regulated industry like healthcare, finance, et cetera, we have prescriptive measures that we have to take. For those that aren't in a regulated industry, I still think you have something to look at. We have standards out there. Choose your framework, COSO, COBIT, NIST, whatever. Decide what is appropriate for you and then look to attain to it. That's how you mature your program. And understand, I've had CISOs tell me before, oh, that's just paper. Policies are management's intent. The controls then are how do we address that, and then the execution and monitoring goes behind that. So understand where your gaps are in those spaces first, and I'd be willing to bet you a lot of the program is not there because people, especially in IT, have this assumption a tool is a control. It is not. We need the program to identify for the software, for the hardware, whatever, how to configure it based upon our risk stance.
So you just brought up one of my favorite soapbox items to get up on is the false sense of security that teams and companies have because they've bought a top right quadrant security tool, but have ineffectively deployed it or ineffectively configured it. So this is a good question to ask the panelists. How are you going about making sure that when you buy that best of breed tool, and I think not to beat CrowdStrike up, but it was a great example of best in breed tool does a lot of great things. Unfortunately, it became the risk, right? Because it caused business revenue outages, not because of a cyber attack, but because of a poorly written update or poorly timed update, whatever you want to call it. So how are you going about making sure that when you deploy these tools, that they're, one, deployed across your entire landscape, and two, that they're employed with the proper configuration and you know when they're working and when they're not working? So how are you guys going about communicating that risk to your partners that you're relying on for this? Tara?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. So within our program, we have a program called CAP, that's our Cybersecurity Assurance Program. And so what we have is a library of 137 controls that we basically test ourselves against. And so we test ourselves not with a pass or fail, but with a maturity measurement against the NIST scale with our maturity targets identified. And so then each control owner who's responsible for information governance, who's responsible for training, who's responsible for DLP, data protection. So we have very specific test cases and with those maturity targets in mind, and then we identify what gaps there are. And you know, when we're trying to get from a 3 to a 4 or a 4 to a 5, it's usually documentation and automation. But even at that, if 4 is our goal and automation will get us there, we'll identify that and document that. So we not only do we respond to controls from internal audit, SOX controls, our SOC testing, all the things that we respond to, we actually have our own internal controls that we test ourselves against. So that's how we know. And you know, it is, from a governance standpoint, it's, my boss will always say there's always this healthy conflict between governance and operations. I'm like, no, there's not. I just want to know what you're doing. Did you put that tool in and say it's in? Are you doing anything with the output? Is it touching 10 systems, 5 systems, 1 system? Like, tell me what it's doing. I just want to understand at what level of maturity have we implemented this tool. But don't just say we put it in and it's running, because I don't care if the lights are blinking or not. If it's generating reports and we're doing nothing with it, I'm in bigger trouble than I was before you put the tool in.
Yeah, because now you're aware.
Now I'm aware.
And not doing anything about it. So now it's negligence. It's not ignorance. It becomes negligence at that point, right?
Absolutely, and testing is extremely important. You know, you talk about a pen test, internal pen test can help with that, right? Yeah. There's also tools that we've seen here, cloud security posture management. They're a way to monitor if, in fact, those tools are configured appropriately, right? Now, there's other tools that are on-premise and so forth as well, but that's where the monitoring of the execution of the controls comes in.
Yeah, that's why I mentioned the process part. Like, as the owner of a function within the cybersecurity team, it's my responsibility to give account to management what we're spending this $1 million for this particular tool or whatever, right? And the process part comes in having something that happens frequently, quarterly, yearly, where we agree, okay, this is the 100% is full coverage with all the features turned on and working and tested, right? And then you break down 50%, 75%. So if every month, every quarter, you look at the tool, you check, are we implemented fully in the company, or we're just 90% of the endpoints or 50%? And also, are we using all of the features? Which that can come from a QBR with the vendor, or are features that we're not using. All of that will give you a number that over time should tell you you're increasing the coverage and the usability of that money the company is giving you, or you're not, which at the end might help you to renegotiate the contract. Hey, we're paying this much, but we only need 75% of the features because these others are covered by another tool, for instance. Now I can go to the vendor and say, take these line items off and my bill decreases for renewal. I have a gain there. Or maybe I can show that to management to prove that I need headcount, or a number of issues can show if we measure that over time, and that comes from not buying another tool, but just doing human process.
Okay.
I think she had a question.
Yeah, I was going to let Tamika answer, and then we'll get some questions.
So I think I would just add that that's the importance of the continuous monitoring, right? But it's also important to just be realistic, right? We do buy these nice, beautiful tools, but sometimes we can't implement everything right away, right? So it's making sure that you know what you can implement right away, and then having a plan for implementing those next features. So the QBR is something that I use, right? Holding that vendor accountable or that partner accountable and saying, hey, we've implemented this, but we need to implement everything that we need that you guys offer, but we need to do it in stages. Because I think that's where people go south sometimes is they try to do everything at one time instead of, implementing strategically so that you're doing it properly.
So before we go to the audience questions, I do have one more question because you guys just brought it up. And this is for all of the sponsors in the room should be listening to this, by the way, because this is a question specifically around what your vendors can be doing to help you with exactly what Tamika just brought up. How are you guys engaging, making sure with your vendors that you have the appropriate partnerships internally to fully understand how to roll their product out? And this is what I call the total cost of ownership of their product. Helping you build out that total cost of ownership, which is not just the cost of the product they're selling you, but what other teams are going to be tasked with a work resources with a volume of effort that is going to require them to get the product effectively rolled out, get the configuration rolled out, and understand what it possibly may break and may not break, and who are they getting, making sure they got the right people in the room when you guys are having these discussions. So how are you guys going about making sure that you're helping your vendors help you make sure that that is something that is getting put out?
So just like was said with the QBR, that's one very valuable way to do it. Second is kind of like a one-on-one, if you would, with an employee, where you're getting together with that partner. And I love that you said partner, because it's not about the transaction. We need vendors, we need organizations to partner with us, not to transact. If we're partnered, that means they understand my business, they understand my pains. They're not asking me to tell them my pains so they can sell to them. They're asking because they truly want to help solve them.
I am kind of friendly to a short-term contract, not 3-year contract to start with, but 1 year or less, because that's the only way that both parties can agree, have expectations, and yet have the wiggle room to potentially fail. The vendor might either intentionally or unintentionally show later that their product was not up to par to what we had discussed, or we as the buyer may later find out that we don't have the support, the headcount, the infrastructure to support it. So in a short term, both companies, both sides of the equation can gain knowledge, verify the product, and then we can talk about 1 year, 3-year contracts or bigger commitments or a bigger rollout. I think that.
I'm probably the worst customer ever, right? Because I do hold partners accountable, because I do look at it like it's a partnership, right? But I hold them accountable. Like, I had a conversation with a partner yesterday that's helping us do some implementation stuff, and they're just not meeting the requirements. And so I, had a very frank conversation. Like, I don't feel confident that you can do what it is you told me you can do. I mean, just saying the words. And sometimes I have to go to my team, I'm like, was I too hard on them? But, and it's not, I'm trying to be hard or mean, but I need to hold you accountable, because at the end of the day, it comes back to me, because I have to be able to show return on investment. So I take the partnerships very, very serious, but I also make sure I hold my partners accountable for what they promise to deliver.
Okay. Tara, you got anything?
Yeah, I'll just add a quick thing. When I ask a potential partner for references, I don't ask for references of where you've installed this and was successfully installed. I ask for references of where an organization has successfully installed the software and built a program around it, so that I can understand who's it going to take. Like, I'll use Varonis, for example. We use Varonis for data discovery, access discovery. We use it to clean up data that's out of retention. And, today or yesterday at our town hall, I was like, oh my gosh, y'all, we're deleting 6 terabytes of data. And everybody's kind of looking at me, and I'm like, you don't understand that took 6,000 conversations with data owners to get to the point where we're deleting that. So I want to understand what kind of work is behind the output of these products. How many people am I going to need? What's it going to look like to actually clean this thing up that this product is telling me is a problem? So I think we need to challenge our partners to help us understand, okay, but now what? I've got the product in, now what? Now what do I do with it? What do your dashboards look like? How can you help me execute? What automation is there? Whatever those questions are. I think that's important.
Great information. I got one thing to add to this, and this is pointed at all the practitioners in the room. You owe it. We're asking our partners to be transparent with us and tell us how we're going to get this done. You owe it to them to be transparent on how the difficulties that you're going to have in the procurement process, the difficulties in the rolling it out, the bad relationships that you're going to have to deal with your IT teams to get this deployed, the amount of work it's going to take to make the application change. So you need to have that same transparency. So a partnership, and I stress this a lot, partnership goes both ways. It's not just you're expecting them to provide a service for you and them to make your life better. You need to help them understand so they can make your life better. So we're about to run out of time here, so I want to give the audience time to ask any questions before we wrap up here. So anybody got any questions that they'd love to ask? All right, we'll wait on the microphone to get up here.
So earlier you commented on how cloud is becoming more of a risk. We talked about a lot of areas, but you mentioned cloud a lot, especially with AI coming into play. So my question is, how do we make sure that we do our due diligence with the cloud, especially when AI is now being incorporated? Because AI is rapidly changing. So if we're not already doing our due diligence in a vital area, how do we go about cloud when AI comes into play, especially when we're talking about incident response? I mean, while, like you mentioned, phone numbers can change with incident response and who handles that and what, I'm trying to think of what we're supposed to do and how we respond. That changes, people who we talk to, but AI changes too, and our environment changes too. So how do we go about navigating that rapidly changing environment with cloud?
So I think for me, it's the biggest thing is understanding your cloud environment and the inventory, right? Because with cloud, there's a lot of shadow IT happening, right? People are just going to buy things. So make sure you know what you have in the cloud, so having a good inventory, and then making sure that you have some type of mechanism for scanning that environment and remediating anything you find. Tara's keynote was all about policy too, right? Making sure you have the right policies and procedures in place, and you communicate those policies, specifically around AI, right? A lot of times we have these policies and we have them to check the box and they're on the SharePoint site, but our users, our colleagues don't even know they exist. Not only do they not know they exist, but they don't understand them. So making sure that you're training on those policies and making sure people understand those policies so that they can follow them.
So more tactically, first, make no assumptions. Too many people go into the cloud and make an assumption, cloud provider's protecting me. When it comes to infrastructure as a service, most of it's on you.
Okay.
So from a perspective of, if you want to be more secure in a cloud, don't go in as infrastructure as a service. Go in as platform as a service. So that's first and foremost. Don't make any assumptions. Have the cloud provider or SaaS provider outline where they stop and you start.
Yeah, responsibility matrix is incredibly important when you move into a cloud. Who's responsible for what, and how it's what the handoffs are, what they're contractually obligated to. Those are all big pieces of that. So it's something that you definitely have to be thinking about. And I mean, the cloud responsibility matrix, Microsoft's been producing it for years. Is when you buy their Azure product, they tell you, if you buy this product, we do this you're responsible for this. And like you said, depending on whether it's IaaS, PaaS, or SaaS, that shifts left or right depending on what you're doing there. So that's something. So talking about AI, just one thing I was going to throw a stat out there. So the average cost of breach for this year was $4.88 million for a company to lost revenue and recovery. If they're using AI and automation appropriately within their environments, it reduces that cost of breach by $2.2 million. So if you're doing AI correctly and automation correctly, it is a force multiplier and is a great tool. So I think we got time for one more question, and then we're already over, so we'll go ahead and get this out there. So
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So my question was, I've seen that departments can easily track their success through KPIs like revenue growth or customer satisfaction. When it comes to cybersecurity, it seems it's more of things that don't happen. You know, at the end of the day, did you guys get breached, yes or no? So what are KPIs that your companies are tracking in order to show your team's value and your success?
I like metrics. Any particular function within cybersecurity or any?
Any that would show your value.
Okay. I ask why because depending on the function, for instance, vulnerability management, instead of measuring how many highs and lows you're patching, maybe you want to measure velocity, which is more meaningful to the business and shows more your work. In my team, we do data governance. We set out the 100% number is a combination of how we scan and classify the data and the different vectors of potential exfiltration that we have, email, browser, et cetera, and we assign a weight to each of those, right? So we know, at least for the sake of argument, that protection via email is worth 30%, and then there are 40, and that accounts to 100, right? Then each of those areas we break down into what are the main steps we need to bring that area to full maturity, and we assign a weight to that. So by the third, fourth breaking down of that workdown structure, now we assign specific goals for that year. We want to advance 50%, 20% by implementing this tool or by creating this new process. So in our particular case, we created this roadmap where we expected the first year to go from one number to the next one, so grow this many, right? And that's our goal for the year. And it's made out of those different components that everybody in our team. Shout out to Parth, he's here. He's one of my team members. So what that allows us is to have an objective way of measuring what we do, most of that against NIST CSF, and an objective way to see where we are going, where we are growing, where we need more people. We combine that with headcount, so how many people do we need to implement this tool or do this process, which had the total gives us this many. That's what I go with to my CISO and say, I need this many people if you want us to go here, or we can meet this goal here, these people, or if we don't have money for headcount, that's fine, we can try to hit this one. And now we have something to have that conversation, and every year we can see the growth. We went above goal, below goal. But it gives you something to measure that is based on risk, based on, again, NIST CSF, and based on the specific particulars of that particular function, in our case, data governance and data protection.
all right. Guys, anybody got 2 seconds worth of input they'd like to put on this, because we're already over, and I know they want to give away. And we're standing between everybody and the door prizes, so yeah, they're already with the cart and ready to give out. Anybody else got anything? So I'm going to add one thing to her question, though, real quick. One of the best things you can do, and it was brought up earlier when we talk about third-party risk questionnaires, if you're selling to another business or an external party and you're filling out all these questionnaires, if you can equate your security program to being able to fill those out and answer yes to 90% of the questions, it's now a business enabler that is allowing more revenue to come in. So now that's where you get into putting a revenue number on the control against the potential revenue that's coming in from a customer, and me being able to say yes to that sales cycle. That's where you become that business enabler, and if you can ever get your metrics put to where you're a business enabler, it makes it a much easier process to have that conversation. So I want to thank our esteemed panel here. They've done a great job. They've answered a lot of questions. They've given us a lot of great information. Thank you, everybody, for hanging out with us, and thank you. Appreciate it.
Big thanks again to Ken, Luis, Tera, Tamika, and Marc. That was a fantastic way to end 2024. So, yeah, round of applause, please. They deserve it. Taking the time out to spend with us. I know it was the busiest times of the year, busiest eras we've lived through. So, all right, who's ready for some prizes? I feel like we can do a little bit better than that. All right. All right, this one. This one's gonna be better.